Did you hear what sounds like a sellable set of proposals that theoretically could get 60 votes in the Senate?
Well, background checks is the one that would be closest to 60 votes in the Senate as of now. I'm sure it's not there yet in these negotiations. The other possibilities are some version of safe storage. He wants safe storage with a civil liability, so that if your gun is, if you did not safely store your gun and your gun is then used to inflict damage on someone, that person has the right, or their family has the right, to sue you for that, which they would, by the way, in other situations where things within your control cause damages to other people. That's a normal concept of civil litigation. There might be a version of safe storage, maybe with a softer enforcement mechanism. The red flag laws are a possibility to be legislated in some federal form that he also identified. The biggest ask there tonight was to reinstate the 1994 assault weapons ban that Joe Biden personally passed through the United States Senate, along with a limit on high-capacity magazines. That's the biggest ask of this Senate. The House of Representatives could handle that. This Senate, getting 10 Republicans to handle that would be something of a legislative miracle at this point. But this speech tonight is the speech that this subject and this legislative effort needed tonight.
Yeah. And, you know, Michael, yes, there is this hurdle of having to get 60 votes. It's going to be very difficult because, as Senator Chris Murphy said, you have to convince Republicans that there is no political cost, that there won't be a cost to them in primaries or in a general election if they defy the NRA, which is something that is very difficult to convince them of. But, you know, there often are these comparisons to Lyndon Johnson. When you have to litigate something that is unpopular, Johnson faced, you know, extreme opposition to the idea of passing civil rights reform. Is there something to be found in that history that this president can use via persuasion?
Sure there is. You said it perfectly. LBJ in 1964 and John Kennedy before him said, you know, there's about to be a revolution. It can either be handled with conservative methods by trying to restore justice and giving people a stake in the society, or you can try to repress it and you're going to have full revolution. What's the difference here? Our children are getting killed. And I think the best thing that Joe Biden can do, especially in terms of what Lawrence says quite rightly, is the need to get those Republican senators, is to remind people this is the most conservative issue in the world. This is public safety. You know, people talk about the Second Amendment. You know, this is an offense against our children's right to life sitting in their schools. There shouldn't be anything more conservative than that. And the liberals, progressives, moderates have let right-wing people in this country run away with that. It has to be restored. LBJ, just as you're talking about, in 1968, wanted a gun safety bill. And he got a very diluted one. And he did it because in February of 1963, there was a magazine, then is now published and owned by the NRA, called American Rifleman. Had an ad in it for a mail-order Italian carbine from Chicago. Young 23-year-old man named Lee Harvey Oswald read the magazine, wrote in for the carbine, ordered it. He shot it in Dallas on the 22nd of November. But at least in those days, the vice president of the NRA said, we're not going to be so stupid and so insane as to stand in the way of control of a weapon that killed the president of the United States. We have not been living in such a crazy world for 60 years, but we have in recent years. The president has to remind people, we all have a right to life. This is an issue of law and order. Last I heard, those are conservative principles. Let him tell that to those 10 senators.
Right. And I mean, Lawrence, it is not as if there are not already regulations on firearms. There's a reason why we no longer see the situation that we saw in places like Chicago in the 1930s, where people were gunning each other down in the mob with machine guns. Machine guns are heavily regulated by the federal government under the, you know, tax code, but you have to have a certain specific kind of license to own one. It is so difficult that a person who I don't know, got treatment that they didn't like at the doctor's office, couldn't just go to the store, buy a machine gun and come back and kill people with that. But you can with an AR-15. The federal government has a role to play here, and it already does it with other kinds of firearms. Is that an argument that could work on Republicans who make it sound like there are no regulations? Because there are.
Well, Joy, you made it sound like or I should say, Senator Murphy made it sound like there's no argument that can work, because what Senator Murphy is suggesting is that Republican senators need to see that there is absolutely no political price to be paid by them by voting for any of this legislation. And their definition of that would be, we must not lose a single vote in our reelection campaigns. Now, let's just think for a second about the utter moral bankruptcy of that. So you're saying that you will take no action to save the lives of school children at their desks in America if it costs you anything in your reelection. I don't care if it costs you your entire political career. You're supposed to cast that vote. And these people suggesting that it's reasonable for us to oppose this because it might hurt us in our reelections, they are simply using a world of moral bankruptcy that has descended on Washington as a standard operating procedure.
It is putting power, not even party, but power before children. Michael, depending on your poll, expanded background checks have an 80 to 90% popularity rate.
Right.
This is an overwhelmingly... Right. And I think having children be alive when you pick them up from school, I'm going to guess has 100%.
I totally
popularity
agree with
rate.
you.
So there is no moral argument. Is there an historical argument against protecting children from being slaughtered in school?
No, there's not. And it's the most, as I say again and again, this is the most conservative thing on earth, is keeping our children alive, restoring public safety. Whoever thought that this radical idea that people could run wild with assault weapons had anything to do with conservatism? It's exactly the opposite. So you add that to what you and Lawrence are quite rightly saying, which is overwhelming majorities for a lot of gun safety measures that the Senate and the House have stood against in recent years. It reminds me of what Everett Dirksen said in '64 about civil rights, an idea whose time has come. It had come 200 years earlier, but better late than never.
Better late than never. And by the way, police agree with it. Note that they weren't reluctant to run in when one man had an AR-15. They weren't going to face it. Police agree with this. Lawrence O'Donnell, Michael Beschloss, could not have thought of two better people to talk to on this tonight. Thank you both very much.